put it at the service of this, that is really achieving the transformation to address the biggest challenge for humanity. Some other announcements. For example, yesterday, the United States joined Britain, France, Germany, and the European Union in a multi-billion-dollar partnership to support South Africa finance a quicker transition from coal. This initiative is valued at $8.5 billion overall. Japan and Australia have also announced commitments to double their adaptation finance, and commitments from Switzerland, the US, and Canada for the Adaptation Fund. New commitments have been made also by Spain, Ireland, Luxembourg. So I do hope that by the end of this conference, we can really get to the goal of the 100 billion, not anymore in 2020 and 2021, but really hopefully in 2022. There was also a global forest finance pledge that was launched at this COP, including commitments by a group of developed countries to collectively provide 12 billion for forest-related climate finance between 2021 and 2025. Now, the important point is that all of this needs to be reflected in the outcomes from the conference. The conference needs to acknowledge, of course, these significant steps forward, but we also need to see there how we are getting to move from these announcements to the mobilization of the trillions that are required. The COP president has made a very broad presentation of the different groups that are already meeting. Let me also say on behalf of the Secretariat that we continue to work very hard, closely with our UK counterparts in order to make things, especially the access to the venue, as agile as possible. But I do want to ask you to bear with us for your understanding because of the fact that we do need to have strict controls that can allow us to take every possible measure to ensure the health and safety of all participants. Thank you, Mr. President.
Can we open the floor now for questions? Gentleman on the right here first, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Sebastian Montes from Forbes. My question regarding the emerging markets. How is going to be the finance for the emerging markets, and how are you planning to help countries such as Colombia and Latin America to ensure this transition to climate-friendly technologies in order to help them to ensure their climate safety, in order to taking into account that they are one of the most vulnerable continents in order to the climate consequences that can come in the future? Thank you.
Let me start on that. Well, obviously we've talked about where we are in terms of the $100 billion delivery plan. Clearly, countries that are eligible for that will be able to get support. I think there is a wider piece here as well about how do we support countries, for instance, with a clean energy transition. As you know, yesterday we launched together with Rockefeller a fund, £10 billion initially, building up to $100 billion by 2030, as part of supporting countries to make that clean energy transition. We started off a Energy Transition Council as part of our COP26 work. That is going to continue for at least the next 5 years. and we will be working in partnership with that particular fund as well. And I think this goes to the heart of what Patricia and indeed world leaders have also talked about, is that the public finance is absolutely vital, and we need to make sure that that is delivered. But ultimately, this is also a case of ensuring that we are leveraging private finance as well to support the transformation we need to see around the world.
Lady in the green here.
Oh, I'm too short. Hi, Lisa Friedman from the New York Times. Thanks for doing this. Two questions, if I could. One, I know you said bear with us about the logistical issues, but I hope you could address them a little more and what's going to be different. There's a lot of anger mounting outside the blue zone, people who can't get in, many more people accredited than capacity, wheelchair access, et cetera. I just spoke to a veteran of 15 COPs who said this is the worst organized he's ever seen. I hope you could speak to that. Secondly, on vulnerable countries have asked, the Vulnerable Country Forum have asked for countries to come back every year through 2025 to increase their targets to the 1.5 goal. Is that something that's under consideration in the actual negotiations? Thank you.
Great. Let me take those two, and then Patricia will want to come in perhaps on at least on the logistics one. Firstly, I think we all recognize, I think just the fact that we are sitting socially distanced, the fact that you're wearing face coverings, the fact that you're having to be daily tested, this is a unique COP in quite extraordinary times. And I can tell you that the feedback I have had personally from ministers and negotiators is that they do think that what the UK, together with the Secretariat, the UNFCCC have done is something really quite positive, that we have managed to organize this event in these COVID times. Nevertheless, of course, we regret any logistical issues that people feel are stopping them coming in a timely manner, and we are working to fix those. Clearly, on the first 2 days of COP, when the world leaders have been here, there has been particular pressure on the number of people coming to the venue. We've seen some of that today, but I hope that will settle over the next few days. But Patricia may want to talk in some detail to what we have done logistically today with the Secretariat to make it easier and quicker for people to get in. On your second point, in terms of keeping 1.5 within reach, obviously that is something that a goal that I think just about every world leader has amplified over the last couple of days, and that is going to have to be reflected in the negotiations. Now, all of this is going to have to emerge through consensus, but there is a very clear ask, I think, from world leaders that we consider this as part of any decisions that are made here at the COP. Patricia.
Yes. Thank you, Alok. And well, as the President is saying, really the fact that we are operating in COVID context has completely changed the way that we can put the premises at your disposal. Look at this room. Normally we would have at least twice as much as the capacity that we have right now. We are used to having also rooms packed with people that are standing if there is not enough seats. So that's not possible. That's not possible because the responsible thing to do and what is being done in every country in the world is really to look at what are the measures that need to be taken in order to prevent. So this is really, and I kindly ask you to take this into account. Let me give you an example. One of the situations is that the lanes, the security control lanes have been reduced because they need to have, there needs to be more distance between all of them. So we do have a huge area, as you can see, and I'm sure you are all feeling it in your feet, that the COP venue is really very big. but the capacity of the different installations has been reduced. The need, of course, to control also the lateral flow test that every participant needs to take is also one more filter that we have never had before. So it's just an issue of capacity. Second, yes, I have to say, I personally am surprised at the enthusiasm and the amount of people that have come to Glasgow. And I feel this is fantastic because it shows that people are committed and interested and engaged and they want to be there, and that's very good. But it does pose a significant challenge in terms of logistics. So the wheelchair access, I really don't know exactly how that went, because let me tell you that this is an area that is very carefully planned. There are access. Probably what happened is that the person did not go to the right entrance. But I don't want to take responsibility from us away, but I do want to make the point that that aspect has been really one that we have taken care of. There have been situations of people complaining about accessibility problems, so we really took special care in that.
Down the front, I've got everyone here. Lady in the red in the front.
Continuing with the logistics, not maybe with the issue with the entrance, but on the transparency on the process of the negotiations. To Mr. Sharma, you mentioned that it was a great beginning of the COP, but today on a previous conference, the civil society said that it was the least inclusive beginning of the COP over the last decade. I would like to know, how are you going to reorganize the participation of civil society during the negotiation process? And to Ms. Espinosa, I would like to know a little bit more about the role of private sector on climate finance. Thank you.
Forgive me, can I ask your name and where you're from?
Sorry. Thais Gadalara from the Media Redacción from Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you for those two questions. I think firstly, in terms of transparency, look, we are totally committed to this being a very inclusive COP. You've heard our responses to the previous question. I'm not complacent. Patricia is not complacent about this. We have a regular discussion every day, in fact, to try and address the issues that are emerging. You will know that at one point there was a discussion around a ticketing system for people to gain access to rooms. We consulted with parties. Parties felt that wasn't the right approach, and so we put something else in place. What I can say to you is that we are aware that observers have raised some of these issues, and we will ensure that access to them is available. You will also know that in addition, of course, to physically being in the rooms, there is access virtually where people can actually tune in and see the discussions that are ongoing.
Thank you, Alok. Let me make also a comment on the transparency of and the inclusiveness. Imagine, this is the first time that we have asked governments to be represented only by 2 delegates in the room. So, I mean, what I want to underline here is that the limitations of space and the limitations in the numbers of people that could access the room is for everyone. It is just a question of capacity. And so there were some spaces assigned also to the observers, the different constituencies, but yes, for sure, not enough. But it's really just a question of capacity. The same about the delegations. Normally, you know how many people are in those rooms. This time, it was just not possible. Regarding climate finance and the private sector, well, I would say that especially at this COP, since we met in Madrid, I think what we are seeing is really a big change in the finance sector, including and especially the private finance sector that is realizing that climate risks are very important for their portfolios and that they need to align their portfolios to a more sustainable way of doing things. If you look at the program of activities in the climate action space today, it's just amazing. The level also of the panels, the president was chairing one panel this morning. There was another panel with Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the World Bank. I met this morning with the CEO of Citi, who, by the way, is a woman, which made me feel very happy. So it is really a remarkable change.
Gentleman at the front.
Thank you very much. It's Masato Kimura, Japanese freelance journalist based in London. My question is about coal and cash, mutual dynamics and correlations. So you mentioned about Japanese adaptation fund. So, but adaptation sometimes means just buying time. So Boris Johnson said clearly timelines, 2030 phase out for developed countries and 2040 for developing countries. And could you show us the big pictures, timeline of coal phase out and cash dynamics?
Well, I think, well, let me take that question. So firstly, in terms of coal, I think what you have seen is quite a remarkable change over the past months, in the sense that we've got all the G7 who have now committed in May at the Climate Environment Ministers meeting that I co-chaired, to say that they will not be financing any international coal projects from this year. We had the same commitment from South Korea, and then you've seen at the UN General Assembly, China also has now committed to ending international coal financing. Of course, you know, we are seeking further commitments when it comes to domestic coal from countries, and we'll see where we get to. You know, I think we do recognize that what we are asking from some countries is going to be really very, very challenging. But I think this goes back to the point about how do you support countries to make a clean energy transition. And I just briefly mentioned in response to an earlier question, the Rockefeller Fund, which has been set up by Rockefeller and Bezos and others collectively. I think that is what we're going to need to do to particularly support developing economies as part of their energy transition. On the issue of cash, I think we've discussed that in terms of you know, where we are on the 100 billion delivery. But then, of course, what also matters is the private finance mobilization as well. And I think both Patricia and I have discussed that in questions just now.
The second row lady here, please.
I'm Wang Qing from Jiemian News from China. Two questions. First, can you elaborate a little bit on how you plan to work with China in terms of climate finance? And second, we all know that a few years ago, developer country made these promises of 100 billion to vulnerable countries, and we know the difficulty of implementing it, but I think all of us want to know right now in here, this time, how can we be confident that these promises made in this conference will not be another blah, blah, blah? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think in terms of China, I was in Tianjin, as you will be aware, in September. and I had a very constructive set of discussions with Xie Zhenhua and other colleagues. I met him again when he was arrived here from China. I met him in London, and we'll have further discussions, obviously, with the Chinese delegation. Just on the specific issue of climate finance, you asked me, how can we be confident? I would certainly recommend that colleagues who have not done so to look at the detail of the delivery plan and look at the accompanying analysis from the OECD. I do think that this is the most transparent work that has been done in terms of demonstrating how that 100 billion goal will be delivered. And if I just give you the background, obviously individual countries submitted their climate finance multi-year commitments to the OECD, as did the multilateral development banks. The OECD analyzed those numbers. If you look at the detailed report from the OECD, it sets out the very detailed criteria that they applied to these numbers, and then they also used a factor for how much private sector money would be mobilized from the public finance. And again, if you look at that on a historic basis, that really is pretty conservative. So I think we can say, based on the numbers, that we should have confidence that it will be delivered in 2023, and that over that 5-year period, you will get to 500 billion plus. Of course, there are further announcements that have been made over the last couple of days, and obviously, that may be something that the OECD wants to reflect on as well in terms of what that means for overall delivery of the 100 billion goal.
Front row, Colin.
Colin Fernandez from the Daily Mail. The numbers of delegates from different countries have been published today, and they show Brazil has 479 people, Turkey 376, Democratic Republic of the Congo 373, and that compares to, say, the UK with 230. I mean, are some of the delegations excessive, in your opinion, in size?
Yeah. Well, I think from a UK perspective, I haven't seen those published numbers, but I think from a UK perspective, that may just refer to negotiators, not, I think, everyone who is here as part of supporting this particular event. I mean, Patricia, I don't know whether you want to comment on historically how these numbers compare with previous COPs, and perhaps when you were COP president a few years ago.
Thank you. Well, the fact is that there are different practices in each government on how to accredit their delegations. In many cases, and I do know this is the case, for example, of Brazil, they include in the delegation people from the private sector, from civil society. They include also members of parliament, some subnational authorities. So it depends a lot if you go through the list. If you would go through the list, you would see it is really a different groupings. Some other countries don't do that, and really just include the negotiators in their delegation, and then they find a different way to be able to give access to the private sector. Members of parliament normally are included in the delegations also because it is there is not a constituency of parliaments, although there will be this Sunday a meeting of the Interparliamentary Union that will bring together legislators from all over the world. But the intention with that is, of course, to create also a lot of synergies and enthusiasm internally to transform the commitments in actions, working with all the different actors in society and politics.
lady with the pink mask here.
Maybe if I may, just to say, the same happens, by the way, on the side of civil society, right? We have this time, I don't have now the exact figure, but if I remember correctly, and we can check that, we have this time already over 10,000 non-party stakeholders, members of civil society accredited. And yeah, it poses a challenge, but it has also, it has a very good meaning. Oh, we have 13,000, almost 14,000 NGOs, civil society representatives registered. By the way, this time, because there is a possibility also to follow remotely, some of those registered were registered, but they intended from the beginning to be following the conference remotely. So this is also something that we need to take into account. Thank you.
Emily Beeman from PA. Mr. Sharma and Executive Secretary, do you think enough new announcements on mitigation, leaving aside the methane and the forests announcements, were made at the World Leaders Summit to reassure vulnerable countries that major emitters are serious about delivering on the 1.5 goal? And how do you think that that will feed through to the negotiations over the next 10 days on the decision that we hope will come out of it at the end?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Obviously, we have seen some more NDCs that have emerged, and I think if you look at the net zero pledge, as I said, we are at around covering 90% of the global economy. We're less than 30% of the global economy when we took on COP26. But one of the earlier questions was around how do we address any gap in ambition. We know that to keep 1.5 within reach, we are going to effectively need to halve global emissions by 2030. When we had a meeting of ministers in Milan and then previous to that in London, clearly there was a consensus emerging that we are collectively going to have to address the issue of how we close that ambition gap, and that is something that will have to emerge through consensus and discussion at this COP.
Well, I can. The only thing I would add to what the President has just mentioned is that we have been receiving in the last days also some additional NDCs. But we don't have yet the update to give you the whole picture. There will be an event on NDCs on Friday, if I remember correctly. So that will be an opportunity to look at it. But the fact remains that we have a gap, and that we have really to work on how are we going to address that gap. And this is I would say, in terms of ambition, the biggest challenge of this conference. On the good side, I can tell you, I haven't heard anybody saying, no, we don't want to work on that, or that is not something that is important. So I really hope that we find a good way forward.
This lady here.
Hello, Mr. President. I'm Hu Yue from Caixin Media China. I have two questions. The first about the Chinese NDC. I saw some reports of the Chinese released NDC saying that China didn't make any new promises and maybe full short expectations of the goal. I want to know is if you have any comments on the Chinese NDC. And second is about the $100 billion. I know that the goal hasn't been met yet, but even for the realized part, I think that the developed countries and developing countries, they have different opinions on whether this money really goes to the climate change financing, or whether it should belong to, or it's just the traditional maybe infrastructure establishment or project. So how do we to solve this kind of disputes even for the realized parts? Or we just like, do we have a more strict specific rules and to make sure that people agree and have consensus on this, this funds, where it's going to and which part should it fall into? Thank you.
Well, great. So I think firstly in terms of the classification of climate finance, I mean, obviously the analysis is done by the OECD, and we know that the last set of numbers that we have is for 2019, where just under 80 billion was shown to be mobilized. And I think if you look at the criteria the OECD use, it is actually pretty robust. So I think you can use the OECD analysis as a pretty good benchmark on what is being mobilized. On your second issue about China's NDC, yes, I think it showed a little bit of movement from the 2015 NDC. So, for instance, I think there is now a renewables target which is enshrined in the NDC of, I think, 1,200 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. But of course, I would like more from China. I would like more from indeed all countries. And I think the whole point of this COP is for every country to come here and demonstrate leadership. And I think that's what I hope we will see over these next 2 weeks as part of the negotiations, for every country stepping up, showing leadership and playing a really constructive role on reaching what I hope will be a positive set of conclusions at the end of this COP. Anything, Patricia?
No. Okay. Sorry, did you have your hand up earlier? This gentleman here.
Hi, Frank Jordans from AP. Mr. Sharma, I'd like to come back to the topic of the day. Something you said this morning when you compared the leading financial institutions to an environmental campaigner. I think his name was Swampy, and you said they are the new Swampies. Some climate activists were a little bit baffled by this comment because you were referring to the same investors who for the last few decades have been funding fossil fuel companies. So isn't this the ultimate greenwashing of the financial industry? And Ms. Espinosa, in that regard, do you think it's right that investors should be making a profit from solving a problem that they were partly responsible for causing?
Well, I think the analogy I was making was actually to demonstrate the fact that what we have seen over the last few years is a big move in the private sector and the financial services sector to go green. I remember when I started in the city in the 1990s, clearly climate finance, investing in green was not mainstream. I do believe it is now mainstream. You've seen the commitments that have been made by financial services firms. You've seen through the Race to Zero campaign, the UN campaign, which commits non-state actors, corporates as well, to go to net zero by 2050 on science-based targets. That has had a big pickup as well. So I think the point I was making is that there is a big momentum from the private sector in pursuing green growth, and that I think is something we should all welcome.
Well, on my side, my comment would be, there's no doubt that we need to have a complete transformation, deep transformation of the economies, and that includes, of course, the private sector. Yes, of course, would hope that there could be some willingness to work closer together in a collaborative way so that solutions can be more easily and more widely used in different countries. But it is a fact that we need the private sector to do this deep transformation.
Can I just check for time as Executive Secretary? Are you okay for another couple of questions?
What time do I need to go?
Let's do a couple more.
We'll go to a couple more.
Let's do a couple more.
Gentlemen here,
Yeah.
got your hands up.
Zach Coleman with Politico. Wanted to follow up on some of the finance commitments. A lot of the voluntary frameworks that banks and financial institutions have joined are disparate in some ways in their methodologies, and there's not clear methodologies figured out for what financed emissions mean, what even offsets can be used, and when they can be used. So I'm wondering, do you believe that we have a firm understanding of what net zero means and what these banks have actually committed to? And then secondly, President Biden yesterday said that he believed that China had lost its ability to influence people here at the COP with President Xi not showing up. I'm wondering if you feel the same way.
So I think your first question is about how do you verify whether or not the commitments that are being made at the end of the day are going to deliver net zero. So on the Race to Zero campaign, which I was just talking about, of course, those commitments are analysed. You are required to put science-based targets in, and GFANZ, which was referred to earlier, their members are again required to set science-based near-term targets within 12 to 18 months of joining that particular grouping. And as I understand, around 90 of the founding institutions have already done so. Your issue in terms of China, well, look, I mean, we are having a negotiation and a discussion here, and I think there is an opportunity for us to work together. I don't see this as us trying to be in conflict. This is about us working collectively together to ensure that we can reach agreement at this COP. And I can tell you from all the conversations I've had with governments around the world, the visits that I've done, there is a very clear recognition that climate change doesn't recognize borders, and it does transcend what I would call normal politics. And that's why we've had 120 world leaders come here. And I hope that spirit of cooperation is going to continue over those next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thanks. Leslie Hook from the Financial Times. 2 quick questions. First, just a very specific one. Did China have the opportunity to join by video link for the world leaders stage? Was that ever an option that was presented, or was it sort of a, did they have that choice, or was it your choice? Second question, tomorrow's Energy Day, and I wonder if you could give us a bit of a preview of what's coming on coal, which of course is your favorite topic. Can you give us a sense of what % of the world's coal fleet might be impacted by the announcements tomorrow, or some sense of the scale? Thank you.
Well, finance is also one of my favorite topics, as you know. Look, I think I don't want to preempt what comes tomorrow at Energy Day. We'll have another press conference, so I'll be happy to come and answer questions on Energy Day. On the issue of countries and leaders participating, we've been very clear and consistent on this issue right from the start, which is that we've said that for participation in the World Leaders Summit, that was always going to be a physical participation. We've had 120 world leaders come. I'm very pleased that they've come, and actually some of them have made a challenging journey across from their countries because of the restrictions through COVID. Nevertheless, they made the effort to come here. What we also said is that for anyone who was not able to participate, they were able to issue written statements, which I know China did, and we're very pleased that that is now available on the UNFCCC website.
Cool. Any more lady here in the green that's had her hand up back? You see? Here she is.
Thank you. Caroline O'Doherty from the Irish Independent. It's a transparency-related question. Can you tell us how many individuals working on or on behalf of fossil fuel companies are present at COP? And could you comment on what their role is here?
I mean, I can't give you I can't give you a number on the sort of breakdown of different sectors that are represented here. I don't know whether we even have that analysis.
No, I'm afraid we don't have any numbers of that. I mean, if you would ask me whether any company is somehow registered, that I can tell you this is not the case. But I could not give you. We'll try to see if we can have information on that.
I mean, I would just say to you that if you look over this 2-week period, we have theme days, and you can see the events. It's pretty transparent in terms of the events that are taking place, who is involved over this 2-week period, and you can make your own judgment and analysis on that.
Yeah, Carolyn, we can take that back by the press office and get back to you with some more details. The gentleman next to you in the white shirt. And then after that, that'll be the last question. Thank you.
Hi, Josh Gabatis from Carbon Brief. As the negotiations move on to the post-2025 goal, what kind of outcomes would you like to see from those negotiations, and how can developing countries be reassured after the failure of the 100 billion target?
So I think you'll forgive me if I don't get into the details of negotiations which are starting. There may well be a point over the next couple of weeks where I'll be able to say a little bit more about that, but you'll appreciate we are literally at the start of all of these discussions. All I can say to you is that overall, I have been encouraged by the way that negotiations overall have started. I think there is a spirit of cooperation in this. And of course, in terms of a post-2025 goal, what we are doing here in Glasgow is a start of those discussions. The conclusion of those discussions is going to take place at future COPs.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thank you.